Stone doesn't usually leave engineers speechless, yet that's exactly what happened the moment European surveyors first stood beneath the towering canyon walls of Mesa Verde. Their eyes followed vertical cliffs rising hundreds of feet into the sky. But what stopped them cold wasn't the rock itself. It was what had been carved into it. Entire cities, tucked into the cliffs. Not crude shelters, not temporary hideouts, but structured multi-room complexes with precision, planning, and purpose. Homes stacked like honeycombs, towers rising from stone ledges, windows aligned, walls shaped, defensive positions calculated. And the question hit immediately: how? Because nothing about it made sense through a European engineering lens of the time. No scaffolding marks, no visible access routes wide enough for material transport, no evidence of draft animals hauling loads, no iron tools, no pulleys, no cranes. And yet, there it was. Perfectly placed, perfectly balanced, perfectly deliberate. The deeper the investigation went, the more unsettling the realization became. This wasn't just architecture, it was a system, one that had been refined over generations by the ancestral Pueblo people, long before European influence ever reached the continent. The cliffs of Mesa Verde weren't chosen randomly. These weren't desperate people hiding in caves. This was strategy. Southwestern Colorado is harsh terrain. Summers burn, winters bite, resources shift with the seasons. Survival isn't guaranteed. It's negotiated daily. And yet, within that challenge, the Pueblo people didn't just adapt. They engineered solutions that worked with the environment instead of fighting against it. Take the positioning of the cliff dwellings. At first glance, they look hidden, tucked beneath overhangs, protected from above. But that wasn't just about concealment. It was about temperature control. Those massive rock ceilings acted as natural insulation. In the summer, they blocked direct sunlight, keeping interiors significantly cooler than the exposed mesa tops. In the winter, they trapped heat from the sun's lower angle, creating a passive warming effect. No furnaces, no insulation materials in the modern sense. Just physics, understood through observation and experience. European engineers eventually recognized the brilliance, but not before struggling to explain it. Then came the layout. These weren't random clusters of rooms. The cities followed patterns: living quarters, storage areas, communal spaces, ceremonial rooms known as kivas, circular, semi-subterranean chambers used for rituals and gatherings. Each space had a purpose, each purpose had a place, and every placement had intention behind it. Even airflow was considered. Narrow passageways controlled wind movement. Openings were positioned to regulate ventilation. Smoke from fires could escape without suffocating inhabitants. It wasn't just construction, it was environmental engineering, and it didn't rely on written blueprints. Everything was passed down. Knowledge carried through generations, refined over time. Trial and error, observation and adjustment. A living system of design that evolved naturally within the landscape. But the biggest question still lingered. How were these structures physically built in such impossible locations? Because standing below them, one detail became painfully clear. There were no easy paths up. Modern visitors used ladders and carved steps to reach the dwellings. But those were added later. Originally, access was limited, intentionally so. Handholds were carved directly into the rock face, small, almost invisible from a distance. Just enough for someone who knew exactly where to place their hands and feet. It wasn't meant to be easy, it was meant to be controlled. Which leads to another realization that unsettled European observers. These weren't just homes, they were defensive structures. From below, approaching the cliff dwellings would have been nearly impossible without being seen. Anyone attempting to climb up would be exposed, slow, and vulnerable. Meanwhile, those above had the advantage: height, visibility, and cover. It was a natural fortress, and it required no massive walls or armies to defend it. Just design. European military engineers, trained in fortifications and siege tactics, found themselves studying these structures with growing respect and confusion, because the Pueblo people had achieved something remarkable. They created defensible cities without traditional fortifications. No moats, no drawbridges, no towering stone walls surrounding open land. Instead, they turned the landscape itself into the defense. And that changed everything. But the brilliance didn't stop there. Water management was another puzzle. Mesa Verde isn't exactly known for abundant water sources. Rainfall is inconsistent. Rivers aren't conveniently flowing through cliff alcoves. So how did entire communities survive up there? The answer lies in subtle design choices that weren't obvious at first glance. Runoff channels carved into rock surfaces directed rainwater into collection points. Natural depressions were modified to store water longer. Storage jars and containers were used efficiently, minimizing waste. Every drop mattered, and every drop was accounted for. Agriculture added another layer of complexity. Crops couldn't be grown within the cliffs themselves. The mesa tops above were used for farming. Corn, beans, squash, staples of the Pueblo diet, which meant daily movement between the fields above and the homes below. Again, no easy routes. This wasn't accidental. It was part of a larger system of risk management. Living in the cliffs offered protection. Farming above provided food. The separation meant that even if one area was compromised, whether by weather or conflict, the other could still function. Redundancy built into lifestyle. It's the kind of thinking that modern systems engineers would recognize immediately. But at the time, European observers didn't have the framework to fully understand it. They saw complexity, they saw precision, they saw effectiveness, but they didn't see the centuries of lived experience behind it. And then came the materials. No steel beams, no reinforced concrete, no advanced machinery, just stone, wood, and mortar. Yet the structures have endured for hundreds of years. Stone blocks were carefully shaped and fitted together. Mortar made from local materials bonded them in place. Wooden beams provided support, sourced from surrounding forests and transported somehow into the cliffs. Even today, researchers debate the logistics. How were those beams carried up? How were heavy stones positioned with such accuracy? There's no evidence of large-scale lifting devices, no remnants of complex machinery, just results. And results that held up over time. Some walls still stand with remarkable integrity. Some rooms remain intact, their shapes preserved against centuries of weathering. It forces a shift in perspective. Because the assumption that advanced tools are required for advanced results doesn't hold up here. What the Pueblo people had wasn't machinery. They had mastery. Mastery of materials, mastery of environment, mastery of design, and perhaps most importantly, mastery of patience. These cities weren't built overnight. They evolved, expanded, adapted, each generation adding, modifying, improving. A slow architecture, one that prioritized longevity over speed. European engineers, used to faster construction timelines, even in earlier centuries, found this approach unfamiliar. The idea of building in harmony with the land, rather than imposing structure onto it, wasn't part of their standard thinking. And that difference showed. Because while many European-built structures from similar periods have required constant restoration or have fallen into ruin, the cliff dwellings, despite exposure, still stand as a testament to their design philosophy. But there's one more layer that made these cities even more difficult to comprehend. They weren't just functional, they were cultural. Every structure had meaning beyond its physical purpose. The kivas, in particular, weren't just architectural features. They were spiritual centers. Their circular design, their placement within the community, their connection to the earth, all of it carried significance. This wasn't just engineering, it was identity built into stone. And that's where European interpretation often fell short. Because analyzing these dwellings purely through a technical lens misses the bigger picture. The Pueblo people weren't trying to impress engineers. They were building a way of life. A system that balanced safety, sustainability, community, and belief. And it worked, for centuries. Until eventually, something changed. Because by the late 1200s, many of these cliff dwellings were abandoned. Not destroyed, not conquered, left behind, which opened up an entirely new mystery. Why would a system this effective be walked away from? That question would puzzle historians just as much as the construction itself puzzled engineers. And the answers wouldn't be simple. Stone cities don't just get abandoned without a reason. And when European observers finally moved past the shock of how these cliff dwellings were built, their attention shifted to something even more puzzling: why they were left behind in the first place. Because nothing about these structures suggested failure. They were stable, thoughtfully placed, adapted to the environment in ways that even modern engineers could respect. So the idea that entire communities simply walked away didn't fit the narrative of collapse. At first, theories leaned toward conflict. It was an easy assumption. Fortified positions, hard-to-reach dwellings, defensive advantages. All signs seemed to point toward a people preparing for danger. But there was a problem. There was very little physical evidence of large-scale warfare. No widespread burn layers, no mass graves, no signs of prolonged sieges. If conflict played a role, it wasn't the kind that left obvious scars across the landscape. So attention shifted again, this time toward the environment. Because while the cliff dwellings were brilliant solutions, they were still tied to something unpredictable: climate. Tree ring data, something that wouldn't be fully understood until much later, revealed patterns hidden in plain sight. Years of growth followed by years of stress. Wide rings during wet seasons, narrow rings during drought. And in the late 1200s, those rings told a clear story. A prolonged drought. Not a single bad year, but a sustained period where rainfall dropped, crops struggled, and water sources became unreliable. Suddenly, the system that once worked so well started to strain. Farming on the mesa tops became riskier. Yields dropped. Storage could only stretch so far. And while the cliff dwellings provided protection and temperature control, they couldn't produce food. If this kind of story, where history, engineering, and human ingenuity collide, keeps the curiosity going, make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and share it with someone who'd appreciate a fresh perspective on the past.